out this evening. Isn't there great energy in this room? It's awesome. Thank you all for being here and being a part of that. My name is Kelly Keller, and I am the director for the Center for Faith Studies here at Countryside. We're so pleased to have you joining us this evening as we kick off our 2015 season and as we send Eric off for his national book tour with our warmest blessings. Before we get started on introductions this evening, a few just tasky kinds of things. If you're new to Countryside and need to use the restroom, it's simply going out the sanctuary, going to your left, and then a tiny another little left, and you'll see the restrooms by the offices. Also, your cell phone. If you can take this time to make sure it's on silent or vibrate. I was going to hold up my cell phone, but then I realized nobody would recognize it as a cell phone because my daughter thinks it's a dinosaur of a cell phone. We're holdouts. And then thirdly, just a huge thank you to our volunteers, our many volunteers that make tonight possible, from taking tickets, doing programs, setting up the refreshments. We have volunteer baristas that are here tonight to serve yummy specialty coffee in the reception afterwards. CFS events just simply would not happen without our volunteers. So many of them are here tonight wearing blue ribbons, and say thank you to them, if you will. Right now. Thank you. The Center for Faith Studies has been serving Countryside and the broader community for 11 years. And we have our founding person there in the back there, Cindy Kugler. I always like to point her out, because if it weren't for Cindy, we wouldn't be standing here right now. We seek to explore what it means to be a people through whom God is experienced in the here and now, through inviting engaging speakers in the fields of humanities, social sciences, science, theology, and religious studies. And the work of CFS would not be possible without the generosity of Countryside community through your ticket sales, and also we are partially underwritten by the Sherwood Foundation. So we want to thank you all for making that possible. Tonight's event marks the beginning of our 2015 season that we have entitled The Mythic Journey, Serving Beauty and Hope in an Everyday World. Our speakers are united in the understanding that it is not hubris. In fact, it is our task to see our lives as important in this epic human journey we are on together. As Joseph Campbell stated, there are no ordinary humans. We all at some time, or maybe many times, find ourselves faced with decisions and opportunities to live as though what we do matters. Dr. Elnes starts us off with the gifts of the Darkwood, presenting on the themes of his new book. How the obstacles and valleys we find in our lives that we often think are derailing us from our journey are, in fact, the very gifts we will carry with us to live our lives as authentically as we can. Dr. Elnes, many of you know, is the senior pastor at Countryside, where he founded the online program by a similar name, Darkwood Brew, which connects spiritual theological seekers from across the globe in online community and exploration. Dr. Elnes holds a PhD in biblical studies from Princeton Theological Seminary and is the author of The Phoenix Affirmations, a book on experiential worship called Igniting Worship, the 7 Deadly Sins. Elnes also helped lead a 2,500-mile walk from Phoenix to Washington, D.C. in 2006 to promote awareness of progressive and emerging Christian faith. And that walk is covered in a feature-length film, The Asphalt Gospel, and is recounted in his book, Asphalt Jesus, Finding a New Christian Faith on the Highways of America. This evening, we are also blessed to have with us Father Tom Grayson, who has been a priest of the Catholic Archdiocese for 33 years. You wouldn't tell it by looking at him. He's presently servant minister to the priests of the Archdiocese. Father Tom has worked with spiritual formation and lay leadership with seminarians and now priests for over 20 years. He's a trained spiritual director with an MA in Christian spirituality from Creighton University. And from my past experience, I have always found Tom to be an impactful and insightful man of the cloth and of spirit. I've always appreciated your thoughts. And that is why I invited him today, because when I was reading The Gifts of the Darkwood, I was thinking of people like Father Tom and how he has engaged so many on this journey that can be hard at times. So we're delighted to have you with us tonight. So without further ado, would you please help me welcome Dr. Eric Elnes to lead us into the Darkwood.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you. Oh, I am so excited and terrified to be here tonight. Thank you so much for coming this evening. It really means a lot to me to be able to start this tour, which will include LA and San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, Manchester, New Hampshire, and Portland, Maine, back to Seattle and Omaha, right here tonight with the hometown crowd. I'm so deeply indebted to the members and friends of Countryside Community Church in particular for helping to really shape this whole book. Some of you already know that there were just over 200 Countrysiders who read the very first draft of this book, and I'm so sorry to you all who first draft, and the book has been through 4 major redoings. So I pretty much discovered from your feedback that the first draft, about 25% of you said, "This just hits me between the eyes. It's just awesome." Blah blah blah. And then, but listening to the other feedback, I had to admit that it went like to about 75%. That's not a good percentage. Here, when you're trying to talk about, kind of deeply interior things, but translate that into a world of somebody else who has not shared your own experience, it's a lot harder than I ever thought, even as I was trying to do that from the beginning. But 4 drafts later, thanks to your initial feedback, the responses from across the country so far have just been really, really heartwarming, and it seems that it is translating pretty precisely, so thank you. In fact, I'd like to, I won't plan to do this throughout the book tour, but because there's so many of you present tonight, I would like to actually, if you will indulge me, I'd like to read you the acknowledgments so you just know who all was really a part of this writing. American poet and essayist Walt Whitman once observed that a leaf of grass is no less than the journey work of stars. As I turn through the leaves of this book, I find myself in awe over how many brilliant stars have contributed significant insight, guidance, and affirmation over the course of various drafts of this humble book. Among them are authors including David James Duncan, Scott Russell Sanders, Phyllis Tickle, Frank Schaefer, and Lauren Winner. Others include my literary agent, Catherine Helmers, as well as many friends including Patty Tu, Chris Alexander, Carrie Sharkey, Cindy Kugler, Leslie Merle, Deb McAllister, Margaret McGrath, Bob and Gretchen Ravenscroft, Donna and Paul Knutson, Dove Duval, Scott and Anna Grissel. My family played an enormous role as well with respect to both content and moral support, especially my wife, Melanie, her sister, Corey Gant, my daughters, Ariana and Marin, and my parents, Phyllis and Conrad. Incidentally, my father passed away during the writing of this book, and this book is dedicated in part to his memory. My hope is that these pages reflect at least a portion of your brilliance. Most of all, I'm grateful to the members and friends of Countryside Community Church in Omaha, Nebraska, 200 of whom read the first draft of this book and contributed meaningful feedback. Another 50 of these helped create an engaging video series called Gifts of the Darkwood, produced by Darkwood Brew to accompany this book. Guests appearing on this series engaged with this book from their own perspective, adding depth, insight, and frequent humor. These include Parker Palmer, Diana Butler-Bass, Brian McLaren, Lillian Daniel, Frank Schaefer, Melvin Bray, Chuck Moronic, and Semisonics drummer Jacob Schlichter. All of you inspire and amaze me. Just by sheer virtual coincidence, that DVD series, which was just referred to as just off the press about 3 hours ago, I think. And they're available tonight at half price. So I'm very proud of that. Finally, significant portions of this book were written while on various writing retreats. I'm grateful to Dr. David and Judy McGill. Those of you who know Mark and Lori Waterstrat, these are Lori Waterstrat's parents, who graciously allowed me full use of their beautiful Sedona, Arizona home, as hint, hint, anybody else in the future, as well as to the good folks of Spirit of the Desert Retreat Center in Carefree, Arizona, the stars at Arco Sante, an environmentally sustainable community in Mayer, Arizona, are particularly dear to my heart. Portions of this book and 2 others have been written while enjoying their hospitality, vision, creative spirit at their high desert oasis. Those of you who've been around Countryside know we have a tendency to give bells as gifts, handcrafted bells to outgoing leadership, and the bells come from Arco Sante, where I wrote that book. So thank you to all of you, and also thank you to Father Greisen for joining us this evening. And thank you also to the people who are online. We have people who are logging in from all over the country tonight to get to participate in this event. So I'd like to start just with a very small reading from my book and let it kind of sink in a little. Stand still. Stand still. The trees ahead and the bushes behind you are not lost. Wherever you are is called here. And you must treat it as a powerful stranger, must ask permission to know it and be known. The forest breathes. Listen. It answers. I have made this place around you. If you leave it, you may come back again saying, here. No 2 trees are the same to raven. No 2 branches are the same to wren. If what a tree or a bush does is lost on you, you are surely lost. Stand still. Stand still. The forest knows where you are. You must let it find you. Oh, how I wish those were my words. They're a poem called Lost by the poet David Wagner, who graciously gave me permission to put it in my book. Now, since it's in my book, I kind of feel like I own them. They are my words now, not just his. But doesn't that just kind of describe our experience frequently in life? Where we think we're going along, we think we know the path. We've kind of got it down. It's been the path we've been wandering for maybe years. It's a familiar path, and suddenly, like, where on earth did it go? Some of us, enter that. I remember, Dante really entered the Darkwood. He called it the Darkwood. Actually, when you find yourself off that path, he wrote in his Commedia, "In the middle of my life's journey, I awakened in a dark wood. I awakened in a dark wood where the true way was wholly lost." Can you just feel that in your gut? You know those times where just the true way is wholly lost, those dark wood times. Some of us enter the dark wood when we wake up one day and the career that has been affording us a good paycheck and a mortgage payment and food for the kids, we realize it's been sucking the life out of us. Others of us enter that dark wood when tragedy strikes, or a marriage fails, or perhaps health gives way, leading us to question God's very goodness, maybe even God's existence itself. Some of us enter that dark wood when our beliefs or our doubts put us at odds with our friends or our faith community. We can no longer pray the same prayers or recite the same creeds without our internal dissonance meter just kind of going off the charts. Or sometimes we just enter that dark wood, find ourselves lost when we've taken on one too many obligations made to one too many people that get us off doing something that's completely off the side of anything we think is important and is now leading us to complete exhaustion. And we say, I got nothing to bring to the table here anymore. I don't know at all where I'm going. I'm utterly lost. I have no clue even how to get out of this situation. Curiously, if you find yourself, or if you're at least like me, when you find yourselves in situations like this, in hindsight, frequently you discover, or I've discovered, that those are the places where I have actually closest to breakthroughs in my life. I'm in the best possible position for revelation, even revelation from God, I believe. Why is that? Well, how many of you have cats? Anybody? Cats, yeah? We've got a cat at home. Tamar, she is 21 years old. Yeah, 21 years old. That's like 5 billion years in human years, I think. And so she's been with us a long time. I don't know about you, but I have no clue how my cat's mind works. I mean, I cannot predict anything she's going to do, whether she's going to want to cuddle up or stay away or whatever. She's just kind of a mind of her own. I don't even know sometimes if she recognizes me. It just kind of does her own thing. And if I were to try to understand the mind of my cat, I mean, I'd have to let down every kind of understanding I have about how you think, about how you feel, and just kind of do some Vulcan mind meld with Tamar. It's like I would just have to let down all presuppositions of what thought even is. Yet I can't do that. I have no idea. And yet if I can't do that with my cat, I mean, imagine, and if none of us can, anybody know the minds of their cats? Maybe you can enlighten us. Yeah, if none of us can do that with our cats, imagine trying to get into the mind of God. I mean, at least with our cats, we share 96, 98% of our DNA with cats, right? And we get to know them. They live in our houses and stuff, but we still can't figure out our cats' minds. Well, how on earth can we ever connect with the mind of God, claim to know it somehow, or at least have it become known to us? I mean, I just don't have a clue how God works. With God's logic, it's like, 2 plus 3 equals carrots. What? I mean, it just completely befuddles me. I cannot get into the mind of God at all. Yet, happily, I think, unlike my cat, my God actually wants to be in communication with me. My God seems to want to reach in there and mess with me at times, but trying to figure out when or how or where or by what manner, I'm completely clueless. But what I have found over time is that you pretty much have to let down your guard all the way. That it's those times where I have given up on thinking I know God. I've given up on thinking I can figure out the next steps and just simply say, I got nothing. That's when the magic seems to happen. And in fact, it was just one of those experiences that led to the creation of this book itself. 6 years ago, I was at a clergy retreat back east and was commenting to one of my colleagues back there, kind of lamenting the fact that I'd been through this long route with my PhD dissertation from Princeton Seminary. It had been Harvard University had expressed interest in publishing it, but they wanted a few minor changes made, they said. Well, we went back and forth over years over this, and finally we could never reach agreement about what they wanted and what I wanted, and so finally I gave up on the whole thing, and there it had been sat for years, and I was lamenting to my colleague about this, and he said, and actually that colleague's name, some of you know, Don Longbottom, former minister here. Don said, well, have you ever thought about just turning that into a popular book? I mean, don't write for scholars, just write for people like us. I'm like, that's brilliant! Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Yes, of course. And so I made plans. I was going to take 2 weeks and get a start on the book. I was going to go to a retreat center in Arizona, and I've been carefree, and I was going to get a start on this book. I announced to the congregation, I'm going on a book retreat, study leave. I'm going to come back. I'm going to work on a revision of my dissertation, just to write it for real people, not just scholars. And I was so excited. I get to the retreat center. I lay out all my note cards that I'd prepared in advance, and I set up my laptop at the desk and sat down to write, and nothing was coming. Nothing. And so, it's the beginning of everything, so I just kind of, I get up, walk around, do that kind of thing, and sit down and try, just, write a sentence, get into it, make a very long story short, just nothing kept coming, nothing at all. And I, rearranged my cards, and it's, all the voices in my head would say, start here. Oh, no, start here. Oh, no, well, just try starting chapter 2, right into that, then back up or whatever. Everything I did, I could not get into writing that book. Literally a week into my stay there, I had written nothing. But I'd worked all 7 days trying to write. It was excruciatingly painful. And so finally, I just put all my note cards on the floor. I knelt down and I prayed. And I said, God, I'm writing this book for you. Can you help me out a little here? Where do I start? And I waited for any kind of whiff of an intuition. 30 minutes passed. And I was just as blank going in, then as I was going in. So I tried another attack. Attack. Did I just say attack? There's a slip. I said, God, don't you realize that I only have a week left to get a start on this book? If I don't get anything done, how am I going to do anything for the rest of the year? Nothing. So finally, in tears, I said, okay. I gathered up all of the cards in my hand. I said, God, I am willing, if need be, I'm willing to just throw these all down, go back to my congregation at the end of the week and tell them I wrote nothing. I'd rather be embarrassed than write a book that you don't want me to write. And suddenly there's like this brief whiff of an intuition. If I would put words on it, it was like, are you sure? Like, of course I'm sure. I don't want to write a book that's not for you. And it was like something said, I'm so glad you said that, because I've never wanted you to write this book. I want you to write something else. Like something else. And then it was like this flow, of images and ideas that just kept flowing, that was all about just the history of my relationship with God. How do I negotiate this weird territory of trying to have a relationship with this unseen presence or power that is hard to wrap our minds around, that is always confounding. It's like the 2 + 3 = carrots or whatever. And yet somehow in my path seemed to work, and seemed to work in ways that pleased me, got me into the ministry, got me praying every day for the last 35 years. So I started making all these images, writing them down, these kind of high water marks in my life where I really felt like in hindsight I could say, you know what, I may not have been aware of any kind of presence of God or leadership of God or guidance of God at the time, but looking back it was like, oh my gosh, there was coherence there. I felt led. And yet as I made my list, I realized that of all the list of the things that were on there where I thought this was a high water mark for me, all of them without exception were tied directly to these kind of Darkwood experiences, some experience of failure or lostness or emptiness that got me seeing things in a new way and then opened up another avenue. I started realizing that this book was not going to be simply about how to pray really well and be some sort of spiritual guru. I certainly was no guru, and I still think I'm not praying well. But it was really the book is about exploding the myth that there's any way that we can act in this world or anything that we can believe in this world that will set us at a place where life will never hurt us, where the rug will never again be pulled out from under us, where the world just will never slap you around again. So I realized that oftentimes that's a complete myth, that religion oftentimes props up and society do self-help books, all these things. That the true path was actually learning to embrace these very things and not try so hard to avoid them that you miss those experiences of feeling utterly lost. Breathing, admitting you don't know jack, you know what, and then being open in ways that you weren't open before. So this is going to be a tough crowd because I know some of you, the people who have been around this church for a while have heard like all of this material because it's been worked out in sermons and classes and so forth. So some of you is like, oh, I've heard that before. There's others of you who've never even heard of me, let alone read the book. And so I don't want this to be some sort of like insider conversation, nor do I want it to be so much that people who are familiar with this have already heard too much of this. But I do want to give you a taste of what then turned out of that process by starting actually in the very beginning. This is a reflection called Easdale Tarn. Cresting the brow of a ridge overlooking a small mountain lake in the north of England, most of my hiking companions stopped for a brief lunch before moving on to the next ridge. After the lunch break, I swallowed my pride and decided to stay behind with a couple of others. It was against my nature, but my knees, which hadn't been the same since walking across the United States in 2006, were protesting the arduous ups and downs of the preceding day's hike. Finishing lunch on top of a sun-warmed boulder a few yards up from shore, I found the waters of the lake too tempting to be left alone. Their depths seemed to be held in place by two knobby hands cupped and held tightly together as a wanderer in the Lake District might cup her hands before dipping them to drink in a stream. The mountain's granite peaks looked down over the lake in front of us like guards standing watch on a castle wall. The grassy slopes coddling us from behind held the wind at bay, allowing the lake to rest in perfect stillness, beckoning the sky to come down and lay upon it. "The lake will be cold," one of my companions warned. Staying comfortable was not my concern. Interloper though I was, the perfection before me seemed to invite company. Stripping down as far as modesty would allow, I gingerly stepped forward, trying neither to cut my feet on the sharp granite at the edge of the lake, nor to slip on the smooth, slimy rocks in the shallows. I was feeling particularly awkward. My slightly protruding belly had gained another 3 inches in the years since that 2006 walk, and my stumbling around caused certain parts of me to jiggle more than others. At the first opportunity, I lurched forward into the water, hoping to bury my paunch before anyone noticed. "How's the water?" called the mothering companion. "Not bad, actually," I answered a bit too hastily. As the greater part of the group made its way up the ridge above the lake, I inched out toward the lake's center, imagining how poor my strokes must appear to onlookers. My butterfly was an inchworm, my crawl a stumble. Soon my skin started to resemble a plucked turkey against the increasing chill of the water. Guess I spoke too soon, I told myself as my remaining companions prepared themselves for a swim. Seeking warmth and tired of my awkwardness in the water, I stopped, treaded momentarily, then tilted my head back and thrust my chest forward until the length of my body rose to meet the lake's sun-drenched surface. That extra bit of belly is good for something, I told myself, as I effortlessly floated without increasing or deepening my breath in any way. I felt like one of the drifting clouds reflected on the lake's surface. As the late afternoon sun bathed and dried my face, neck, chest, and toes, some imperceptible breeze turned me until my feet pointed like a compass straight toward the grassy slopes where I'd eaten lunch. My gaze shifted from the wispy clouds and surrounding blueness above to the tan boulders nestled in the green grass. For a moment, my protruding toes seemed to merge perfectly with the boulders. Body thus united with mountain, water, and sky. I could almost hear a quiet voice whisper, "You have a place in this world. a place where everything comes together in your body and you disappear into a seamless whole. Get over your clumsiness and your fat little belly and inhabit this world with your fullest self. A few minutes later, the breeze picked up, breaking both the surface of the water and my concentration. Feeling the water's chill once again, I made my way toward shore, rising cautiously above the surface, aware again of my belly and nearly slipping on the green rocks beneath. I suddenly lost hold of the peace I had grasped just moments earlier. But then a quiet certainty smoothed itself over me. It seemed to whisper, "The peace you just let go of is not ready to let go of you." I took another step forward, reminded that I not only have a place in this world, but that the world has a place in me. You have a place in this world. It is a place where awkwardness dissolves and you are most fully alive, therefore most fully human. You know this place very well, though you may feel far from it. Take a deep breath and hold it briefly. Try it. Exhale slowly. You know this place. You may not always know how to get to it, but you recognize it every time. Likely you first sensed its existence in early childhood. Over the subsequent course of your life, you may have stumbled into and out of this place of aliveness many times, especially during periods of significant upheaval or transition. These were brief moments of awakening when something way down inside suddenly leapt to attention and cried, "Home!" Yet much of the time, you may feel far from home. You are closer than you realize. Much of the time, you may feel more like Pinocchio, woodenly meandering through life, hoping to be alive one day. That day could be today. This book is about finding your place in this world at the very point where you feel furthest from it. It's about recognizing the fierce beauty and astonishing blessing that exists within experiences that most of us fear and none of us can avoid. Ultimately, this book is about seeing your life through new eyes, recognizing that experiences of failure, emptiness, and uncertainty are as critical for finding your way through life as they are unavoidable. These experiences frequently offer clues, in fact, to what the ancients would name our calling or path in life. A number of these clues come through experiences of spiritual awakening that present themselves not in the absence of struggle, but deep in the very heart of it. Welcome to the Darkwood. Welcome to that place of greatest lostness and yet greatest aliveness. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Elnes. We'll have a chance to ask questions in a moment, but I'd like to, at this time to call it Father Greisen, who's going to share some reflections.
Good evening, everyone. Isn't he impressive? Anybody else want to follow him? I thought, oh my goodness, like Garrison Keillor with spiritual insight, you know? It's wonderful, really. First of all, I just want to take a moment to thank you and your community here to be invited to this. This is, when I was invited specifically by Kelly, your first instinct is like, no, fear and all that kind of stuff, but this is a wonderful thing for me to be able to be present to this and to be invited to this. And so I am honored to be here with you and to be a part of people who are trying to be seekers and read a book and to try to figure their heart and their life out and finding merit in being with another soul seeker. So I'm grateful for being here. I also have to acknowledge the privilege it is to be here in this sanctuary with Eric. We never met before tonight, but even in the weeks, the last month of spending time with his book, you get a sense that you really get to know a lot about who you are on the inside. Those of you who are reading it, there's a thread of a spiritual diary where there is so much transparency and honesty about himself in the midst of things and his family that it's quite moving to see somebody so open and vulnerable. And just like you witnessed, very educated. And you might not think you're praying well, but it's authentic prayer because it comes through in the book quite clearly that there is a prayerful spirit in here, and he's quite reflective about it, which is another gift. Many of us can be authentic in our prayer, and good things are happening, and God is happening, but the ability to reflect upon it, and then with his education, to teach out of that, that's wonderful. So I also realize that Eric is in the more vulnerable position of permitting me to be here. I'm grateful he's not sitting in my church going to talk about one of my homilies. It's like,
that could be arranged.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say, though, if you need a responder going with you across the United States, I'd be open. And if you don't like what I'm doing tonight, I am teachable, okay? So I was given the text and asked to talk 10 minutes or so. I'll probably go a little longer. We priests, like preachers, will take 10 verses and go for quite a while. So when you get 100 pages, no telling. I thought I would break this up this way. I don't know if I'll get through it all, but I crafted 3 points. And one would be, as an outsider, how would I contextualize his book? How would I see it fitting in the big picture of all the books written about spirituality? And then what kind of contribution in the midst of that do I see him making? Then the second point I would like to talk about is, so standing in an ecumenical conversation as somebody outside of in a different denomination is to say, how would my denomination look at something a little differently? And what would we say, or what kind of language would we want to use to talk about it differently? And then finally, if I could be so brass, is what book would I encourage him to write after this one? I don't need to make any dedication to me either, okay? Okay, so the first thing is like the big picture thing. One of the contemporary Roman Catholic priest teachers, Ron Rolheiser, and maybe you're familiar with him. He's very good. One of the things he says that, and when you look at the entire spiritual journey, there are two major purifications, two different kinds of purifications that occur. And he says the first one is you and I end up wrestling with Satan. The purification is wrestling with the enemy of our human nature, however that gets figured out in your life. And so primarily it's stage, but not stage. I mean, there's times in your life where you realize, this bad vice, this sin, this repetitious habit is really biting me, and it's got a grip of me. And my purification is wrestling to become free of this, to live in the light, to live in grace. The second purification he talks about, though, is later on, generally, with more maturity and with some freedom from sin and the like in the world, is wrestling with God. Now, I find that fascinating, to wrestle with God. And in the Old Testament, there's Jacob who does that, and then he gets his new name. See, what I would, from my point of view, as I read your book, I would see really the Darkwood is the place where you and I, in our failures, whatever pulls us into this, throws us into the dark wood, these are the places where we are ending up wrestling with God. And then, in that wrestling, two things are occurring to us. We're being purified about false images of ourselves. And secondly, we're being purified, pruned, about false images of God. This wrestling is the wrestling of love-making. It's not violent. It's not mean-spirited. This is a wrestling of love-making where the Divine One is saying, let me tell you who you are, who I created when I created you. Let me tell you who I really am. And like Eric's own experience of saying, can I communicate? Can I understand? I can't. How can I ever do God? So imagine what the loved one, God, has to do to clear out all this junk we have about God, to purify us so we can encounter the real one. Now, one of his quotes of Rainier Rilke, where in one of his chapters he talks about this, that this is how we grow, Wilkie says, by being defeated decisively by greater and greater beings. I don't like that. I'm sure you don't either. Right? But that's the truth, huh? And see, this is the wrestling with God that happens. Now, what I respect so much in reading Eric's book was, this is a man, and there's authenticity. You can feel it and hear it. Sometimes his heels were etched in the floor and the ground, being dragged into these things. But this is the maturity that he's demonstrating in the book that's helpful for us, is that at some place in time in these negative, we would call, or Darkwood experiences, he relaxes enough not to be constricted or to run away. He relaxes enough. And so his poem about the loss, or this metaphor, this image of floating on the lake there, relaxing. And it's in that relaxing then, see, we find his clear, articulate language that can describe the experience, like, what is really going on here? I got all this fear, anxiety, I want to run like hell, and if I just relax, just breathe, realize the lake knows I'm home, God knows I'm home. If I can relax, and his careful articulation of things, in that comes a clarity of direction. He's very good at this. This is where, like I say, he's genuinely praying, but he's articulate. And then his education, you can see where it comes through. This is going to be helpful for you. This is one of the quotes where he talks about, and he kind of highlighted himself in the final chapter where he says this, "Yet by now you have probably begun to sense that the experiences you try so hard to avoid hold the potential to bless you with unexpected gifts if you allow them. When you embraced time spent in the dark wood rather than seeking to run away at the first opportunity, you discover that you are connected to a higher power, one who offers important clues about who you are and what you're here for." See, in my language, what I was taught, see, do you hear in that if you stay there, this purification, this wrestling with God, you're going to have revealed to you who you are. And you're going to have manifested who is this God and where do we go from here. Purification of God, I've got to tell you this cute little story. There's a Father Michael Himes is a doctorate. He used to be teaching in Boston College, and he tells this story. So he's very bright and animated. He's just a wonderful speaker. He says, you know what? I've been preaching and teaching God for 35 years. And he says, I've never once experienced any time, at any place, a single person raising their hand and saying, "Excuse me, Father, you're using this word, G-O-D. Can you tell me to what that refers?" He says, nobody ever does that. And he says, that's the problem. Right? We all know. You don't need us because you all know. See? The Darkwood will show you. You don't know. See? This is his cat story. And what's going to clear that? All those conventional things, what's going to clean that out? See? That's why, in his chapter 4 and chapter 5, you're going to gain a sense of a purified sense of God's presence and what God's voice sounds like. When he talks about the gift of being thunderstruck. It's like, I never knew that the voice of God would sound like that. Well, what did you think it was supposed to sound like? Oh, I had an answer, and he never did it that way, see? Right? Isn't that true? Isn't that what we do? See, when he was supposed to write that book, he thought, well, waited 30 minutes. Wow, I usually wait 30 years before I get an answer. You see? I liked this question he poses in chapter 7, in The Gift of Disappearing. He says this, how does God respond when we falter and miss our call? It's only in the Darkwood where you're going to learn the answer to that question. How does God respond when we falter and miss our call? See, the irony is, I only know that God's love is unconditional when I'm in a place where it requires unconditional love. So this is what his experience is and ends up purifying us. I like, too, then the purification of ourselves, our false images. We got family of origin. We got fear of rejection. We've got the desire to fit in. We want to be accepted by our job, our culture, our world. All that kind of stuff tries to define us. And then he'll talk about in chapter 6, the gift of temptation, where we're being tempted to become the lesser good. That's what we're all fallen for. And we denounce the greater good in the Spirit. I loved his definition of humility. Listen to this. Humility as living by God's vision of you, not your own. Isn't that wonderful? And even in my work, that's really the hard part. We all want to take somebody else's definition of us or define ourselves. And the real work is go to the one who created you. Let that one tell you who you are. And that is real humility. And the irony is that he'll end up then in chapter 8 saying that the true self really is a misfit. Isn't that playful? It is. It's playful. I liked it. I have to say, I don't know if you're familiar with Flannery O'Connor, and she uses that word too. And so when I got to that title, The Gift of Misfits, being a celibate, you feel like a misfit, right? Right? So, but this is where I want to move then to the second part. The thing I would say here now, in this ecumenical conversation, so where would I see my tradition trying to talk about different language? And it would be in the last two chapters, chapter 8 and 9. And I think it starts in chapter 8 with this gift of the misfits. I think it's most appropriate and respectful and insightful to talk about Jesus' disciples as being misfits. I think that it really fits. We'll use language like countercultural. Everybody uses that sort of thing. But where my own, now this is me, and this is where I would love to have a beer and talk about this. See?
That could be arranged.
Okay. How about Los Angeles? This is where, though, see, the Darkwood to me is like, what's going on in this purification, my language? What's going on? And what he brings up in the gift of misfits then is he's going to talk about the kind of needing different people in your life, companioning you in the midst of the Darkwood. That's To me, it's like, that's right on. Whether it's an individual mentor guide, small group thing, community thing. I think that's all great. Where I think my tradition would want to go, though, with the discussion of the Darkwood experiences, is that this is the place of transformation. This is the place of being emptied. Kenosis in the Greek, huh? This is the place of that. And then, so what is being transformed? That we are being transformed as members of the body of Christ. That we are being transfigured into the glory of Jesus Christ. Our Orthodox brothers and sisters, I think, do this better. We have it in the Roman tradition, but it's not, we're a little bit nervous about it. We're not as clear about it. The Orthodox are very clear about being divinized and deified, they'll talk about. Huh? That this transformation is transforming us into Christ. And so that's a misfit, but at another level, there's a profound beauty, elegance, elevation that I think our tradition would want to start talking about. And then you start saying to yourself, we are being transformed into a corporate identity where we are members of the body of Christ. And you are this part and I'm that part. Huh? And we are united in that. I think that would be a place where the Darkwood is going, taking us. The cross of the Darkwood leads to resurrected glory, and we experience that in small ways too, just like we experience the Darkwood. In those chapters too, then becomes the question of, so the old orthodoxies of the classic world religions. When I read that, I thought, oh, he's talking about us. I closed the book. I got a glass of wine, and I thought, breathe. Yeah, see. Now, he talks about, like the fringe, and the beautiful thing about the Misfits is that it carries that notion of the fringe, huh? And then the image, I'm assuming the Persian poets of the tavern sort of thing, of the religious, the spirited people, and the church, the tavern being an image of the church. I think that's all, there's a lot of wonderful things there. This is where, though, like my tradition would acknowledge some of these things, and I think we're trying hard to rekindle the primal fire. He talks about that. Well, our last few popes are harping at us about this continuously. And I would say this, put it this way, I don't have to rekindle the fire because the Pentecost fire is promised. It is more that I would make myself available or be broken open by the Darkwood experiences to where the fire takes over and transforms. And not to be afraid and to let that happen. See? Pope Francis, this president, he is a fringe pope, isn't he? It's beautiful. And everybody, this is one nice thing about being a Roman at this time, and it's like everybody, I go on an elevator and they say, are you a Catholic? And I say, yeah, I'm not a Catholic, but I like your pope. That's nice to hear once in a while, So here again,
Here. Oh.
it's time's up already.
Wait. But if we have people on the internet who won't be able to hear you.
Oh, I see.
You got it.
Okay. So, our present Pope is of talking about rekindling and fringe. He's been very critical of the hierarchy. He's been very critical of us priests. And he's pushing us. And I mean, the whole experience of not sitting in the rectory symbolically, of getting out where the vulnerable, the marginalized are. And this is a reconfiguration for us. And, you know, that it's not easy. We've been wired, in a sense, a certain way. One of our older priests, we had a time where we were reflecting upon this together. One of the older priests, and God bless, he's been retired for a number of years. He says, all my life I sat in my office, and he says, I couldn't keep up with all the phone calls and all the people that were coming to see me. And he says, I spent my whole life living that and doing that and thinking I did a good thing. And he says, and now we hear the Pope saying, I shouldn't have been at my office. I needed to be out there. He said, I don't know how to do that. So be patient with us. I mean that sincerely. Yeah, I do. And so then this whole question in the context of the misfits and everything, and what are we being transformed? We're being transformed into Jesus Christ, the risen Christ. Huh? So what does that look like? I think some of my tradition would say, so in what ways are we a misfit to the world and society? Is Jesus' misfits the ones who are pro-life or pro-choice? Is Jesus' misfits the ones who are value traditional marriage or openness to gay marriage? See? Which one is the misfit of Jesus? And that's why it leads to this. The next book I would like you to talk about, because when you read his book, you will see an intelligent, articulate, prayerful person who kind of maneuvers and figures it out using that language. He knows instinctively how to discern. I think the real work, though, for all of us and as communities together is, how do you do this discernment? What's the recipe so that we would have a common way of talking about we're going through the process together so we can come to similar conclusions? Does that make sense? I loved it. He quotes Phyllis Tickle where she says, was that the Holy Spirit talking or the pizza I just ate? It's hilarious, but it hits the target right on, doesn't it? Okay? Let me share this story with you, and then I'll end. True story. You know, in our tradition, we have had moments in our history where the official church has decided that we believe that the Blessed Mother, Jesus' mother, appeared, that there have been appearances of her, and that's been recognized. Okay? So, true story. One day, a woman parishioner comes to her pastor and hands him a piece of paper. And there are like 5 to 10 things on this piece of paper. And the woman said this, the Blessed Mother talked to me, and she says, we need to change these 5 things in the parish. How would you like to answer that one? Okay, this is what he did. And I thought it was brilliant, because he's one of our better educated, bright guys. He took that piece of paper and he held it in both hands lovingly. And then he bowed his head and he said, I stood there for 3 to 5 minutes with a bowed head, eyes closed, silent. When I lifted up my head, she was still there and she was frowning at me. And I said this, I just spoke to the Blessed Virgin Mary. And she told me I don't need to do any of these things. Yeah, it makes you laugh, but it pulls you into, see? And so the priest's response was, and I don't think she spoke to you either. That's the crux of the problem now, taking that pastoral situation into the divine one, the one that we can't even discern a cat, and I like that story, huh? Now we're talking about discerning the mind of God. See? What are the criteria? How do you go about doing that? Part of my life, the good thing is, I'm mostly a listener. And so I tell you honestly, I am with Roman Catholics and non-Roman Catholics, and we're all across the board in some of these difficult questions. And there's sincerity, there's prayerfulness, there's goodwill of trying to come up with what God's will is. It's just a hard thing to know. And that's why then in our tradition there is this allegiance to history, to the whole group rather than just the individual. It has its weaknesses, but that's where we come from. And so out of that, then, that's where we talk about you writing a book on discernment. Okay? All right, thank you.
What a treat, hasn't it been tonight? We do have Tracy and Bob will be walking around with trusty microphones. Are there any questions? Any questions? There's Dan over there. Terry, or Tracy.
Yeah, I don't know if it's so much a question, but I feel that I forgot your name. I'm sorry, but I feel that you seem to be you have a spirituality, like a psychological gravity. The older faiths, like the Catholics and the Jewish, the more fundamental, conservative, older religious people like yourself that I encounter seem to there's more of a psychological realm that you're more comfortable more in than the newer religions. Like you can talk about the Virgin Mother. You can talk about blood and transmogrification, people becoming Jesus, by an actual corporeal change. There's a phantasmagoric, psychological kind of whimsy, but tragedy that can come with it that I don't sense in the newer religions. The blood of Jesus, the cross. Your language is laced with these more powerful icons and images, it seems like, in a sense. These psychological lights and terrors and fires. Anyway, it's not so much a question, but it seems they seem more authentic to me in many ways because of that psychological gravity and belief, and they're fantastic. I somehow get a feeling of when I hear you speak and the Jewish rabbi speak.
Is this on? Thank you, Dan, and that is thank you for that comment. We do need to keep it to questions for today if there are more questions.
We have an online question to start with here. The Darkwood as a wrestling place means that it's Bethel, the house of God, the place with the opening to heaven, a thin place. So my question is, how do we seek the house of God if it is that place where we unexpectedly wake up, like the dark wood? Or more directly, can we enter the dark wood intentionally?
Oh, you do it. Does this work? Hello? Hello? No. Okay. Am I on? Okay. That's a great question. A hard question. Can we intentionally seek the dark wood? I don't think so. I think the dark wood finds us. Just like I don't think we ever find God. God finds us. And so it's more about paying attention more than doing anything. It's just simply looking and waiting and watching and paying attention. The history of the mystical tradition, as I understand it, is that revelation, basically, life is not very revelatory if you're not paying attention. It's when you're actually sitting and waiting. A number of years ago, I was actually out on I do a lot of talking about these travels to Band in Oregon, where my family has a cabin. And a number of years ago, this isn't in the book, but I was asking myself, this is before I came to Countryside, we wanted to rewrite what worship is all about. I mean, we wanted to craft a new worship service, and I was asking, the question, sitting on the end of the dock, just turning in my mind, what is the basis of worship? And just meditating on that. And my eyes were just kind of staring down in the water, and the water is only about this deep at the edge of our dock. And suddenly this giant bass swims by. It was so big that it was swimming next to the bottom, but was causing ripples on top of the water. I went, whoosh, and I stood up and went, Now, I'm not going to claim that the word of the Lord is in the bass, but what kind of dropped into my head, as the Buddhists say, like the plum that dropped from heaven immediately afterwards, I think had some substance, which was essentially, Eric, this is the basis of worship. If you can open people on a Sunday morning to just a quarter second of the awe and wonder and surrender you just experienced, you can pack up and go home. It is accomplished. You have an hour or so for that quarter second, the thunderstruck, that sweet spot moment. And I think that should be as a model. It's like we can't make a bass swim by. We try, I'm going to concentrate. Bass, come. How much time do we spend in prayer trying to do that? Make God come. It's like, But we can put ourselves in a place with our eyes open so that if a bass swims by, we actually notice. And that's, to me, what the Darkwood is about. Yeah.
Well, I guess my question is to preface it, I think that we're all born seekers, whether we know it or not.
Yeah.
And I guess my question is, does God reveal God's self to each of us the same or different?
I think God reveals exactly the same way to people who are exactly alike. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on that online question because I'll just speak for myself. I think I spend a lot of time putting myself in safe places, safe neighborhoods, safe relationships, things like that, where I don't have to confront people who are really needy. It's kind of like, Father, what you were saying about the Pope is saying, get out of the rectory and go out and meet the people. I think the Bible's full of Jesus' activities and statements to that effect, that we need to go out and embrace the world. And sometimes for me, it's that fear of the dark wood. Am I going to get hurt doing this? And so it's kind of like a follow-up to that online question. How do we prepare ourselves or to do that? Maybe we don't create the dark wood, but we create the opportunities to be observant, like you're saying.
That's a great question. I mean, how many of us can relate to that? I mean, where is that safe spot? I mean, the world just seems like this rushing river right now. It's just with globalization and warfare and environmental stuff going on, everything just seems like this rushing torrent. And first reaction is like, get the heck out, be safe on the shore. But unfortunately, the torrent is so strong that there is no choice, really, but to get into the torrent. If we'll be swept there anyway. So I think it's part of it is finding those eddies, those little places of rest, but with the purpose of getting back into the stream and entering in some way. I think that the churches, this is a fundamental question to me about church too, about faith, what a faith community can and can't do. I think that there are people for whom the faith community, like they step into a sanctuary on Sunday morning, and they've got the chaos of the world going through their head. They're all freaked out. They're exhausted. They come and they want to breathe. This is my safe space. I know this place. This is where my father and my mother worshiped. This is where their fathers and mothers worshiped. And this is that place of sanctuary. I can recharge. The world is shut out for a few moments, and I can kind of recharge my batteries and then go out and fight the good fight. And that's an authentic place to be. That's a place that we all like to find in our lives. But there's another way of being church as well that doesn't denigrate the first way that I've just talked about, but it is another way that's just as important, I think, and that is church as that place where you actually bring the storm of everyday life into the heart of even the worship environment, and you wrestle with the storm so that you can develop eyes to see the Christ or the living Spirit that is in the heart of the storm, so that when you go out of the sanctuary, you're not so shell-shocked when you enter everyday life, that you can see Christ in the heart of the storm. And I think that we need both kinds of ways of being church, but typically churches tend to privilege one, over the other. Incidentally, by the way, you mentioned the next book should be on discernment. I think actually I may have already written it, and I didn't know it. Because a few months ago I sent 2 years worth of sermons for the Countryside, which is our whole By This Way of Life series. And I was asking an editor, a professional editor, to find a way of working a book out of those sermons. And I thought it was going to be like 12 points of convergence Christianity and all this. She said, well, that's interesting, but actually there's a more interesting book in here I see. It's a book about spiritual discernment. So that actually may be the next book.
We have another question from online. Which of the gifts is weighing heaviest on you since finishing the book, Eric?
Ooh, wow, that's a great question. It's a different gift. I discuss 7 gifts. There's really 8, but 8 doesn't sound right, so it's 7. But just I work failure in there too, without being a chapter title. But there's a 9th gift, and I think that the 9th gift that's been on my mind is the gift of seeing the end and finding a place of comfort and actually even a sense of joy in it. And what I mean by that, I mean a whole lot more than we have time to get into. It actually might be part of the next book. But I think that, like for instance, I write about my daughter, Melanie, my eldest daughter, Ariana, who the first day we moved into our house here in Omaha had a seizure, and turns out she had a cancerous brain tumor, and she went through 2 surgeries. That I didn't tell the story about her in the book until just the very last minute. They were asking me for a personal example of something, and I thought, well, of all the Darkwood moments in my entire life, that was the biggest wrestle with the Darkwood, and yet I've kept it out of the whole book, and it felt kind of dishonest, but I also didn't want to write about my daughter and make her uncomfortable. So I tested it out. I tried writing a reflection. I handed it to Ariana and said, listen, I've written a reflection. It's more of a mind exercise than anything else. If you feel comfortable, I can put it in the book, but I really doubt we're going to want to put it in the book anyway. But what do you think about this writing? And she lit up. She loved it. And she said, put it in the book, please. And so it's in the book. And the book talks about how she'd had 2 brain surgeries, and then she has not had any growth in the tumor that remains ever since. But through that experience, we learned a really, 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 really important lesson, maybe the most important lesson of the whole book, which is to make a commitment not to worry about anything until it presents itself to be worried about. Because as a parent with a child with a cancerous brain tumor, if you start worrying about all the things that could happen, you're all dead. And that commitment absolutely saved our family, and has. Since the book has come out, people here at our church know that her brain tumor, actually, she had an MRI about 2 months after I sent that off and it was finalized in the book. They said, the tumor has started to grow again. It had been 7 years. And so that's been the hardest wrestling with Darkwood is the recurrence of that and the realization that likely this, they'll do an operation and likely it will grow back again, and at some point it will upgrade. These things like to do that. Right now it's low level. And, what I'm about to say, I don't want to say at all, suggest at all that what has just happened has been just this wonderful thing, but there is a wonder that opened itself up in a very fierce way, a fierce wonder. And that is, we kind of all awakened to the fact, Ariana herself and her parents and Maren, that there's never going to be a point in her life where we aren't going to be wondering, how much time do we have left? I mean, she might live to, 105, who knows? We really can't know. But there'll never be a point where we'll know that. And so there's this fierce blessing of paying attention. This fierce blessing of engaging fully every moment you have, not knowing how much time you have. And I thought, that's kind of the definition of heaven on earth. Living this life as if this is the only time you have and you don't know how much time you have left, and engaging with life fiercely in that way. And that if we could all kind of have a sense of our ending, that we don't know how much time we have left, and could just be blessed with that fierceness of accepting that this we don't know and that could be short, we might actually live a life before we die.
So, Eric, I'm hearing some things, and I'm going to ask you if I'm on the same page as this. I've been studying Andrew Harvey's work on the Christ path, where he talks about getting the divine masculine and the divine feminine within yourself to wed, birthing this divine child, the process through which we become Christed. And you can't do it without embracing what he calls the Black Madonna. It's his image of what I think is, he says it's your shadow side, or the greater shadow. Is that the same thing as the gift of the Darkwood?
I think the Darkwood is full of shadows, yeah, and you have to, in any of these experiences of lostness, failure, emptiness, temptation, all these things, they push all of those shadows out on us, don't they? They kind of bring them out into the light. And I write a lot about being confronted with my own shadows in the book. But I think there's this weird thing, and I don't really get into it in the book so much, but you kind of get it more by inference. But I think you also learn that God loves the shadow in you, just as God loves the light. That there are aspects of you that if they were just going to be completely erased, they're so fundamentally connected to the light in you that the light would disappear. And I don't mean that like God sanctions sin, or that God loves evil or anything like that. But I do think that God loves the way we struggle. I don't want that to come out wrong. That there is God-bearing stuff in our struggle between our shadows and the light. That in fact, that the heart of our existence on this earth, you call it purification, I call it more learning to choose of our own accord that which is the will of God. And not because we have any threat coming over us, like, if you don't choose this, you're going to be punished. But just you learn through your mistakes as much as anything else, like, okay, I'm not going to do that again. That hurt. So now I choose this willingly. And so now we become more godlike. We become more in the image and likeness of God out of complete free will rather than compulsion. And I don't think we get there unless we really have an honest struggle with our shadows, and honestly embrace our shadows and the struggle we have with them, and not get down on ourselves so hard by the fact we all have them. In 20 years of ministry, I've sat down with a lot of people in my chair in the office. And everybody, almost to one, who's struggling with something comes in and they say essentially the same thing, which is, everybody else in church seems to have their act together but me. Yeah. And I sit and I think, if you could only see the church through my eyes, we're all misfits, big time, and I'm happy to be in that group.
We have another question from online.
Oh, good for you guys. Hey, welcome.
And it has to do with being in the dark wood and not being able to realize you're in the dark wood when you're in the dark wood, not being able to see it. So the question is, how can we see when we are in the dark wood?
It's very easy, actually. When the pain gets great enough, we open our eyes. You know, it's. I don't mean that crassly. It's certainly been my experience. But there is more. Okay, beyond that, I think we actually see more in the dark when we are not trying to run away from it so much. We spend most of our time trying to run away from the darkness, trying to run away from uncertainty, trying to run away from failure and all these things. And if we would just simply accept that they're part of our past, they always will be, that there will never be a time in our life where those things will not be on our path, then we relax into the life a bit more, and we become a bit more open, and we actually just are more open to God, the Spirit. And I'm absolutely convinced that God sees in the dark, as Psalm 139 says, you know, darkness is not dark for you, but is as light as day. That even the darkest dark, you know, we have this cross behind us in a church, and I think that, you know, Jesus is the ultimate Darkwood wanderer. You know, to me, the cross is a sign that you can go into the deepest darkness and discover that there is movement in the dark. That there's a presence there that has found you, whether you found it or not. So Jesus cries from the cross, you know, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani in Aramaic, my God, why have you forsaken me? On the cross, not even Jesus could find God. In other words, Jesus joined us in our deepest despair. And on the cross, it is not Jesus who found God, it is God who found Jesus. And that is a sign to me, if the cross is at all revelatory of who God is or what God's about, I think, and this crosses all the faith tradition, the great faith tradition, certainly Abrahamic faith traditions, it reaches to the heart of it, is that in the heart of our darkness, when we have given up all hope and we're at the shore of the Red Sea, and the Red Sea has not opened, and the Egyptians are coming up behind us with strong arms, that somehow God makes a way where we were absolutely convinced there was no way. And it's not going to be on our timetable. It's not going to be with our logic system, 2 + 3 = carrots. You know, that's the logic system it's going to work on. But it happens. It happens every time. And the cross is the central revelation that you can count on that to happen, that what you think is the ending is actually a new beginning. And that's not to say the cross is a good thing, that Jesus' crucifixion is a good thing, but that it opens our eyes to the greatness even in the heart of the fiercest struggles we have.
You've often talked about grace and the importance of grace. And yet, during all of this, I haven't really heard you say anything about the importance of that. So in relationship to what I've heard you say before, and for my own question, is can only grace assist the deliverance from the dark woods?
Good question. So grace, by my definition, not my own, but I mean the definition I've accepted is grace is either receiving something that you didn't deserve or not receiving something you do deserve. And that's grace, and to me that we're all absolutely dependent upon that. And so I think that the dark wood, our experience of the dark wood does not happen apart from grace. Curiously enough, when I started writing Gifts of the Dark Wood, I actually wrote it without any theological vocabulary at all. I was trying to reach to a broader audience for whom the word God and Holy Spirit and stuff, you know, it kind of short circuits the brain. And so literally the first draft that was so confusing to people had no mention of God, Holy Spirit, and any of these things, but I was writing about God, Holy Spirit, and all these things. I wrote that very first reflection, Easdale Tarn, floating on the lake, is how do you write about grace without ever naming it? So go back and read that section, and that's my answer about grace. But I later, by the way, the book is full of theological language because I discovered that unless you, it was kind of like what Dan called to, the language is steeped in the mythopoetic history of our tradition. It's steeped in it has guts. It has a stake in the ground, and so sometimes you have to have a stake in order to kind of push against a stake. So I reclaim that theological language. So you'll find a lot of grace in the book itself. Yeah.
I think we are at our time. Speaking of grace, I think we see grace embodied in these two men, do we not? Can you help me thank them for being here tonight?
Thank you so much.
We just a couple of things. We're going to let Eric kind of get out there for his books. The Bookworm is here and is selling books. We also do have some DVDs of the Gifts of the Darkwood. But please go to the Commons. We have coffee and water and dessert bars from Farmhouse Cafe, and baristas with specialty coffees. And so please just hang around and be with each other as well. Eric will be available to sign books. And so let's give him a minute to get there before we line up for that. But again, I thank you very much for being here. A couple more items in your program were these evaluation cards. If you would take a moment, if we don't have your information, if you're not getting our emails, we definitely would love to have you on our email alert system, but also our evaluation where you really help us by filling out the cards. And also, if you, the brochure is for our season. Our next speaker is October 1st. It's Chris Hedges. He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, talk about a man with a moral center and conscious. So he will be here on October 1st, and he's going to be fabulous. And so I encourage you all to return on the 1st and tell your friends and bring them. So thank you again so much for being here tonight, and please enjoy the refreshments and drive safely home. Thank you.